everyone, thanks for joining me. Today we're going to talk about fishing the Delta at that dreaded low tide. We're going to really focus in on the folks that have been out here for maybe a few years. You're starting to catch fish, but when that tide pulls out, the fish disappear and you're in that low tide grind. If that sounds like something that is familiar to what you're doing right now, you're going to really want to watch this video. I'll give you all the information that you're going to need to formulate a plan to come out here and start catching fish at low tide. We'll talk about baits, we'll talk about techniques, we'll talk about how to modify those baits and modify those techniques so they will work at low tide. We'll talk about boat positioning, we'll talk about how these fish move from the bank to offshore during that transition period from high to low tide. Everything will be covered. Now, I thought I was going to be able to do this video in one part. There's just too much information. So I'll tell you right now, we're going to have two parts to this video. You're watching part one right now, so let's get into it and we'll start talking about how you can start catching more fish at low tide. If you fish the Delta, you are going to encounter low tide twice a day, 365 days a year. I guarantee it, it's state law. I'm not going to leave anything out, so let's sit down. We'll start this video right now. I want to go over a lot of information that I want you to definitely keep in the back of your mind for a reference, so when you get on the water, you can think about certain things so that you, when you're actually fishing, you'll have information to fall back on to help you put together a pattern. So we'll go over that, and I'll talk about some of the baits that I use and some modifications, minor modifications that I use to standard baits that I fish at low tide that I fish a little differently at high tide. So we'll go over those bait modifications, and then to finish the video up, I'm going to try to find a couple of situations, probably not today, maybe tomorrow I'll go out and find an island point that has some good offshore low tide fishing. We'll go over how you can do that. We might go over a flat, what happens when you have a flat, that when the water drains off of that flat, what you can do on a flat, and maybe we'll talk about fishing a rock wall on the outside of the trough. When that tide pulls away from the bank, you're only left with fishing offshore outside of the trough in a little deeper water. I hope I explained that kind of halfway decent. Let's get going. Number one, fishing at low tide is not the same as fishing at high tide. When you have a river system or a lake or anything where the water is moving up, the riparian zone would be the zone right up against the bank. When we have high tide and that water flushes up there, that becomes a very fertile area to feed. You have an assortment of small bait fish and crayfish that are right up tight to the bank, because as the bank floods, it's a plankton-rich area. That's the start of the food chain. So you have everything from small bugs to small fish that eat small bugs to bigger fish that eat smaller fish, so on and so forth. So one of the reasons everyone seems to catch more fish at high tide is because they can pull up to the bank and fish very close to the bank. And like I said, that's the grocery store. When the water comes up, you know, within 2 to 3 feet of shore, that is the most fertile environment that you can find. So it draws everything in there, and there is, you know, bite windows or feeding periods that happen every time that water comes up. So that's why everybody likes to fish high tide. Now, as that tide goes out, obviously, if those fish are in 1 to 2 feet of water, they're going to have to move offshore a little bit. Here's the deal with fish in the Delta, and please remember this. Most of these fish live their entire life in, I'll say, 1 to maybe 6 or 8 feet of water. That's their entire life, 1 to 6 or 8 feet of water. So the difference between when a fish is in 1 foot of water compared to 5 or 6 feet of water, that is a huge difference. When fish are in shallow water, they're more skittish, they're more aware of their surroundings. Everything that can eat them is also looking to eat them, whether it's birds, whether it's fishermen, whatever you have. So when fish are in shallow water, they're more difficult to catch. Generally, low tide, most people think they have to fish shallow water, but we're going to talk about that. But think about this, when the tide goes out and the fish move off the shore, you don't have to fish shallow water, you just have to go offshore and fish deeper water. Building on that, I want everyone to think of the fish out here to be in one of two modes. The first mode is going to be an active feeding mode, and we all know when that happens because you're catching fish on worms, you're catching fish on chatterbaits, you're catching fish on topwater. They're actively feeding. That is an active feeding mode. The second mode that they will be in is in a sanctuary mode. And sanctuary is a word that they used to use a whole lot that you don't hear a whole lot about anymore. But the sanctuary for a fish is anywhere where that fish can feel comfortable. It can get in a sanctuary, whether it's deep water, where it's under a dock, whether it might be, under a log, or maybe there's some surface vegetation that fish can get up in and hide in, and it can feel comfortable. That is their sanctuary zone. When we fish high tide, we are primarily fishing for fish that are in an active feeding mode. As that tide starts to move out and the fish go out to their sanctuary mode, presumably already coming up into the shallow water, doing their primary feeding, and then losing that depth, moving back out to the deeper water into a sanctuary zone where they are not necessarily actively feeding. Now, can they be caught when they're sitting in their sanctuary zones? Absolutely. But the techniques, the areas, and how you rig your baits and how you fish for those two different types of fish in the two different modes could be the same fish. It could just be going from a high tide active feeding mode. That same fish could go offshore, hide out in a clump of vegetation, submerged vegetation, and now that fish that was actively feeding an hour ago is in a sanctuary zone and it's not in an active feeding mode. To catch that fish, you're going to have to put a bait right in front of its face. On the Delta, I said the fish live most of their life in 1 to 6 or 8 feet of water. What that means is that a fish that is sitting in 1 to 2 feet of water on the bank with just a few slaps of its tail can be out in 6 or 8 feet of water. Now, that may only be 5 feet of distance, 5 feet off of the bank. But for a fish, that is a world of difference. 1 foot, 5 foot, doesn't seem like that much, but for a fish that really seldom gets out deeper than 5 or 6 feet of water, that 5 or 6 feet of water, they're going to feel much more comfortable, and that's where they will be in the sanctuary position. All right, as we get into the video, I'm going to be using my cheat sheet here because I don't want to forget anything. Here's tip number 1. I want you to use your high tide success to build your low tide strategy. We're talking about fish that live in 1 to 6 feet of water. You're catching fish at high tide, and all of a sudden that bite dwindles out, the tide goes out, you stop catching fish. Guess what? The fish that you're catching at high tide, they're not going to move very far away. They're going to be close. You don't have to leave the area. You have to leave the exact location that those fish were in, go offshore a little bit, find where they are sanctuarying, adjust your techniques just a tad, and go from there. So use your high tide success to put together a low tide strategy. Where do fish go? Well, if you are in a larger, deeper slough where the banks are cut very steep, the fish only have to go maybe from a foot offshore to 2 or 3 feet off ashore, maybe 4 or 5 feet, to get out to that ledge and get in deeper water. That's their sanctuary. When you are in a back slough, shallow water that doesn't get a whole lot of water flow, that fish that is in shallow water may have to follow the bank 20, 30, 40 feet up, find a path to get out. Maybe it's an island point, or maybe it's a some type of deep spot in where that's been cut out in the bank, where it can find that deep spot and then move out to deeper water. All of these fish follow the same types of road maps, and when they are in feeding shallow, they know exactly the quickest way to get out and find a sanctuary. If they're in here feeding and a bird comes in or a fisherman comes in, you always know, I saw that fish in there, and the minute he saw the boat, it moved. That fish is moving, in most cases, in my opinion, it knows exactly where it's moving. And if that fish takes, oh boy, I see one about 5 pounds right here, and he just pulled from the shade, or from the sun into the shade. Let me see if this fish pulls up and stays in here. I'm gonna pull the camera down. Nope, he's moving around. But let me pull the camera out here. I think he's gonna come around this other side here. We'll see if you can find him. Let's see, where'd that fish go? He's not there. We'll scare him out of here. We can look around here. Oh, there he is right there. Let's see, he's in that dark spot. He might come out. There he is, went right through there. He's right under that stuff. He may come out. He took off. Let's get back to exactly what I was talking about. As we were talking about these fish that are in shallow water, and that fish that I saw out of the corner of my eye is behind where these berry bushes are. It's maybe a foot of water, and he came right up through there in the shade, positioned himself right here, and when I got up there with the camera, I was expecting that fish to move back down farther on the bank, but it stopped. And when it wanted to get back to its comfort zone, it didn't swim right out. It swam right back in the path that it came underneath. He wasn't totally spooked. He wasn't moving fast. And like I say, hopefully you can pick it up when I edit this. It went right back to where it felt comfortable. Now, what I was getting at is these fish know the exact paths, and they take the same paths most of the time when they're moving from deep to shallow or shallow to deep. Why is this important? Because when you pull up to, let's just say, an island, there are going to be very specific places in that island where you're going to catch 90% of your fish. Those are the places that the fish, when they are in an active feeding zone, will come up and just patrol that active feeding zone. That's where the bait is. Maybe there's a little bit more depth. Maybe there's more cover. Maybe there is, I keep seeing that fish, and if he comes out where I can pull this, oh, there he is, there he is. Let's take a look. This is another one. It's not quite as big, but there's the fish right there. And see where he's going? He's going right back. There he is right there. We may never get through with this video, but back to my point. These fish move out and they move in, they take the same trails. And when you find where those fish are actively feeding and you find the trails where they're moving to, that gives you a big advantage at low tide, because you know that maybe right in front of the boat, let's just say this is a hot spot. I always catch fish right where this tree is. Maybe it's deep there, they got shade, whatever it is. You know that spot, but once the water goes out, you don't know where that spot's at. Where did that fish go? Well, just what we've watched right here, we know that that fish came from down over this way. And let me just, for this situation, there's a dock down there. You see what that fish came from. So in this situation, maybe what's behind me is the active feeding zone. When the tide starts moving out, it's going to go right down the bank and cut out, and it'll go right under that dock, and it'll sit under that dock because it's 4, 5, 6 feet deep. This is real-time shit right now. So let's just say you're here, it's low tide, you know that there's fish always here, the fish are always here, but you can't fish here because the tide's too low. You're going to go right out to that dock, and you're going to maybe flip some worms around that dock. Now, are you fishing 1 foot of water? No, you're probably fishing 3 or 4 feet of water. You're out there fishing the dock in the sanctuary position. Whew. planning on spending that much time on that little piece of information, but I think that could be helpful. Let's look at the next fact here. I think I already went over this, but larger sloughs, the channel, places that have steeper banks, the fish don't have to go as far off the bank to find their sanctuary. Sloughs that are shallow and don't get a whole lot of current, where it's a very gradual progression out to deep water, those fish may have to go up and down the bank and move farther. Remember that. A general rule, the situation that we just saw, the fish went from shallow water to sanctuary in deeper water. Now sometimes they'll move out of 1 foot of water to go out and sanctuary in maybe 2 to 3 feet of water. Because remember, the difference between 1 foot and 3 foot could mean a lot for a fish. So when you start to pattern these fish, when you are fishing offshore and it's not necessarily in deep water, remember that fish in shallow water are much more skittish. So just as skittish as these fish are in shallow water when you come by in your boat and they take off, if you are offshore and you're on a point that has a flat and maybe it's 2 to 3 feet of water, those fish are going to be very skittish too. So when you're fishing the flats and stuff, you have to make longer casts. You have to be much more stealth. A lot of times you'll have to gear down on the size of your baits, so on and so forth. Generally, when these fish go offshore, they're only in 2 feet or 3 feet of water, it's not the depth that's giving the fish sanctuary. It's the cover around them. So when you go off to these offshore places, you're still looking for maybe a submerged log, you're looking for some surface vegetation that the fish may be holding under, you're looking for subsurface vegetation that the fish may be rooted into. Could be a rock, could be a lot of things. So just keep all this in mind. Let's talk a little bit about baits. Number one, you want to stick to the same baits and the same colors that you're fishing offshore. So maybe tip number 2, when you are offshore fishing the sanctuary areas at low tide, you're going to want to make sure you here's tip number 2. You want to use the same proven baits at low tide as you are at high tide. You want to stick to the same colors, you want to stick to the same techniques for most situations. We'll talk about some modifications here in a minute. But stick to your same colors, same baits, and the baits that you have confidence in, they'll work at low tide just as well as they're going to work at high tide. Here's tip number 2, and this depends on who you are and what you are looking to catch at low tide. If you are looking to just get bit, and this is what I suggest for those of you who haven't gained your confidence at low tide. If you're looking just to catch some fish and you don't mind getting numbers and sacrificing size, the one thing that you want to do is drop down in the size of your baits. You don't have to change your baits, you don't have to change the color of your baits. Just drop down with the size of the bait. You'll get bit more, you'll catch more fish in that 1 to 2, maybe an occasional 3-pounder. And at that time, once you get your confidence, then you could start upgrading your baits. You'll have the confidence to stick with those baits and stick with your techniques and patterns for longer periods of time, because the bigger fish just don't happen like the small fish do. So, keep that in mind. And also, when you are offshore, the bigger fish are usually going to come, unless you are punching into deep cover, the bigger fish are usually going to come on a reaction bait. You're going to just cover enough water to where that big fish is in the wrong place at the wrong time. You're in the right place at the right time. That big fish is going to react and you're going to catch it. Most of the time, most of the fish you're going to catch offshore are more fish that are susceptible to techniques that are finesse, drop shotting, smaller worms, smaller creature baits, things like that. Keep that in mind. When you're fishing offshore, boat positioning can be crucial. Just like when you're running the bank, you don't want to be too close to the fish. You want to hit them from certain angles at certain times of the day, so on and so forth. So when we start looking at these offshore low tide areas, think in the same vein that the fish are still spooky. They don't want to see you, they don't want to see your boat, they don't want to know you're there. So boat positioning is very important. Anywhere that you have a point, a drop off, anywhere where you think that those fish are down in a sanctuary, keep your boat as far away from those fish as you can. Don't let those fish know that you're there. Make long, precise cast and really think about a stealth mode. Let's talk about baits. You're going to just be using a few baits, same colors you've always have used when you're fishing high tide, but you're going to modify them a little bit. The first bait we need to talk about would be simply a hollow body frog. And this is a bait that's great at high tide, it's great at low tide. This is a bait that when you go offshore and there is surface vegetation, you can definitely throw it through and over the top of the surface vegetation. When you're talking about fishing low tide and maybe you get offshore a little bit on a flat, and that flat is usually 3 or 4 feet of water, but when the tide goes out, you've only got maybe 6 inches, a foot of water. The fish could still be in there, but the frog is really the only bait that you may be able to get in there. So, you know, when the tide is up, they may not be taking a frog because they don't want to come up from the bottom when it's, 4 feet of water and come up and grab that frog. But when you have a foot of water and that frog comes over them and they're sitting there, that's the reaction bite that we were talking about. So the frog can be a very good offshore bait in shallow water, but we're not going to talk a whole lot about the frog because there's other things that we need to do and concentrate on more than the hollow body frog. But building on that, one of the baits that that I love to use is a plastic toad. This is the Zoom horny toad. I usually use it with a 1/4 ounce weight, and this is a flashy swimmer. It's an owner flashy swimmer. But when I am fishing low tide and there's a lot of gunk around, I take that flashy swimmer off. I'm going to take a standard toad, and we'll show you how you rig this. Here's my standard toad. I'll either rig it on a corkscrew rig like this with a little weight, so that'll be on so that I can throw this without the flash. This is a bait that I can throw out there and pull over the top of cover. Sometimes they'll hit this as it's coming over the top, but when I hit just a little bit of patch, I can drop I can kill it and it'll drop down into the hole. Now, another way that I like to rig this, and probably my primary way of rigging a toad when it comes to fishing in super heavy cover or offshore in vegetation that has holes and pots in it, I'm going to take a standard extra wide gap hook and I'm going to rig it just like a worm so that it's weedless, and I'm going to rig it T-rig style. I'll put a 1/4 ounce weight on it, I'll peg the weight, and I'll just have a little weight in front of this so that it's very weedless. I can throw this out farther, I can pull it over the tops of things, and I could kill it and let it drop down, and this thing will just fall down in the holes and draw that strike. We'll go over that a little bit when we start actual fishing. Another thing that I like to use is a standard tube. And this is a kind of a do-nothing bait. We'll fish it just like the toad, but if the fish aren't as aggressive and they're not taking that toad on the way down, maybe I'll take either a tube or a beaver. You can't not fish a beaver at low tide. T-rigged beaver, using lighter weights in most of the time, so just enough to throw it out there, get a long cast, pull it across the top, let it drop down. Then you can also use your punching rod with a beaver if you have to punch through some heavier cover. And any standard crayfish colors and crayfish imitations are going to work great. One of the things that I like to do with the tube, and I don't know why more people don't fish the tubes, I will throw them on what they call a phantom hook tube hook. And what this looks like is it's kind of like a Janka rig. You can see the hook, the weight here is right here, And that weight, well, let's see, I have it set up so that the weight is on, well, let's just set it up here. You take the tube, you put it in here, and then you rig this just like this. I didn't, just doing it real quick. But that is a great bait to throw, and that will allow you to throw out and let this drop down and just settle in the vegetation and pop it. It's totally weedless. It's got plenty of weight in it, so it gets down there quick. You can draw a reaction bite off of this because it's moving down fast. If fish sees that coming through the mat, it just grabs it. Or it may drop all the way to the bottom, sit in there, twitch it, twitch it, twitch it. The fish will come up and then maybe take it. So tubes are also great baits. Chatter baits, that's another bait that you want to have out here. I always have one on, especially if I have 2 to 4 feet of water out on a flat or an island point. A chatterbait in a color of crayfish or bluegill is excellent. I'm probably forgetting, obviously topwater baits. We'll talk about when to use walking baits, when to use whopper ploppers, when to use buzz baits. Usually on a day like today where there's absolutely no movement, I stick to small poppers and frogs, but if you have some wind and some wave action, that's when you could really do well low tide over these flats that are partially exposed or, you know, out off of offshore where you can cover a lot of water with, say, a whopper plopper or a buzz bait. You've just finished watching part 1 of how to fish the Delta at low tide. I think there's a lot of information there that you can roll over for a few days. Give me, about 5 to 7 days. Next week, I will have part 2 of this video out. I will actually be on the water with rod in hand, and we're gonna do some on-water demonstrations of the techniques, the boat positioning. We'll talk about fishing points, we'll talk about fishing troughs, and we'll talk about fishing flooded flats. That will be in part 2. We'll see you guys next week. Thanks for watching this video. And if you have any questions between now and next week, hit me up in the comments and I'll try to answer those questions so you'll be all set to watch part 2 of fishing low tide on the California Delta. Thanks for watching.